you have this groundbreaking study, the Women in Cannabis study, and you've had over 700 participants from the United States and then beyond, and you've been able to really kind of hone in on some pretty spectacular data. So we're looking forward to hearing, your thoughts on that, and then in our next segment we can talk about your foresight for the future and how we can leverage this data.
Right. So the Women in Cannabis study, as you said, we now have over 900 responses in 3 countries. The study is about 100 questions, quantitative questions, plus we did about 20 qualitative interviews. And we did have over 450 women request qualitative interviews. So we're still looking at ways to get that information.
Tell us what that means. Is that the share your story aspect, or?
Well, in the quantitative survey, so the regular survey, we've asked women to share a top line, a top level of their story. And then we did 20 telephone interviews, half-hour interviews with some of the women, just to get more in depth into those stories. So it's that telephone interview that we want to do more of, but don't have the budget for it this time.
Well, we give you some applause for attempting this anyway, because anytime that you add an additional layer of human touch, it does require some resources. So this is also a good time to say, hey, everybody, if you're interested in supporting this study, we'd love to have your input, help us get the study out faster. And this will be beneficial for everybody in the industry and beyond for years to come.
Yes, it will. And so with those 100 questions, we're looking at a number of different topics. We talk about basic demographics, of course, but then how women got into the cannabis industry. Where did they come from? What are they doing now? We are looking at their cannabis use, for example, whether they can use cannabis at work. We are looking at balance and self-care, skills and education. And then we have a lot of equity measures. And that is, that's what I would say is going to provide us the most information in terms of, how can conscious business practices help the cannabis industry, because we need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The data is confirming the stories that I have been reading online on social media. Part of the reason I did this study was to quantify those stories. I mean, the stories on social media about bullying and harassment and sexism and bias, there's so many, but they're just stories. And so I wanted to quantify that because, anecdotes aren't data. So now I have the data, and the data says, yes, there's a problem. We ask, do you feel that the industry is equitable for women? And only 11% of women said yes. 11. That's terrible. So we have a long way to go, and we have a lot of, information that's telling us what's wrong. And so now we need to come up with those solutions for how to fix the industry. And I'll tell you, now is the time to do that. I mean, the world around us is it's a lot broken. Our economy's broken. Now is the time for us to make changes to this industry so that we don't end up like tech and finance. It's time for us to make changes.
Yeah, we're here during the quarantine cam. I'm in Los Angeles, and we are, working through some challenging times. We're kind of, I think, in the early stages potentially of the lockdown, and we don't know what's going to happen to the economy. Cannabis businesses have been really coming out in full force to create solutions and help fellow businesses create solutions for the economy, what they're doing with their businesses, and how we're going to pivot. So we're excited about that. I think what you said about anecdotal evidence is such a trigger for us in the cannabis industry, coming from cannabis medicine and that world up to this, up until the last 10 years, we didn't have a lot of research. And now, countries such as Israel have come forth with some great actual data. And so now for you to come forward and say, it's not just in medicine that we need these hard facts, we also need them in terms of the social component and what we're doing to really create structures for our industry that are strong and formidable. And, coming from a time when many of our players were living in the shadows or working behind the scenes, now that we're coming forth and we're actually, playing on the global scale, we want to have this industry research, industry data, and it's more valuable than ever. So again, thank you. This is fantastic work, and we're looking forward to seeing where we can go with this. So continue.
Yeah, thanks. So, some of the things that I see, I wanted to just get back to what you said about research. I did a lot of research before I started my research, and I looked at the McKinsey and LeanIn.org study on equity and inclusion. And there were a few questions that I worded very similarly so I could compare. And our numbers the cannabis industry's numbers were lower in terms of being worse than other industry for some of these equity measures. And I'm going to be talking about that. I'm still doing some analysis on those numbers, but it doesn't look good. So one of the things that I'm seeing is benefits. And this is really important specifically now when people need paid sick leave or health insurance. And
Yes.
in this survey, we asked the question, what benefits are available to you through your employer? And then we asked business owners, what benefits do you offer to your employees? And for the employees that are getting benefits from someone else, it's only about 60% who have access to paid sick leave or to health insurance. That's not enough. And then when we look at small businesses, female-owned small businesses, and the majority of the women in the study who own a business have between 1 and 5 employees. And the numbers are really, really small there. Only 26% offer health insurance to their employees, and only 38% offer paid sick leave. And so, this brings the question, like, how do we help? If our government's not going to provide us these things, the health insurance, how do we make sure that everybody has access? Because they don't today. So that's an important thing that we need to figure out. Like, is it important for businesses to offer benefits? I would say yes.
Well, I think just as an industry participant, I think we're operating at a disadvantage in comparison to other industries, in that we don't have the same number of high-level roles even today, and that's been consistent, in the history of this industry. We'd like to see that change, but unfortunately, that's the case. And if we're looking at women-owned businesses between 1 and 5 employees, I think that's fantastic that we have businesses, so many that are thriving in a state that they can do that. In California, there's now new legislation limiting contract workers. So what was already an issue, California has some strong labor policies. And we found that in the United States in the last, I'd say 50 years, labor costs have been a major issue. And that's why much of our manufacturing has gone overseas. That's why our development for technology has gone overseas, customer support, etc. So we're already seeing a crunch in terms of what businesses in the United States can really afford to contribute to employee costs. And now with the economic crisis, I think we're a little bit more under that kind of pressure. So it's great that we are bringing a focus on this as an issue within the industry. And the sad reality is that we do have some disadvantages. So without government support, without banking, all these additional resources, and even here now with the COVID-19 stimulus packages not really funneling through to cannabis businesses, that's just another area where we're not getting the support we need. And now that cannabis is essential, this potentially gives us a little bit more of a foothold and opportunity to affect change, but it's still a challenge. So it's good that we're highlighting this.